I am an actuary.
I am an actuary.
I am an actuary.
Hi, I'm Martin Mulcare and I'm playing guest host for a mini-series of We Are Actuaries. In the theme of leadership, I'm going to interview a number of past presidents of the Australian actuarial profession to find out what are the leadership skills required to lead a profession. This should be fascinating. Hi, I'm Martin Mulcare, and today I have the pleasure of chatting with Andrew Gale, who was president of the Actuaries Institute in 2005. Andrew, welcome.
Thanks, Martin. Pleasure to join you.
Now, you've had an extraordinary career, roles in senior management, roles in consulting, roles in the non-exec director world. Can you take us through some of those critical transitions, especially that first one, when you went from an actuarial career path to general management?
Sure. Yes, I was fortunate in having a very positive early transition experience. And curiously, after qualifying in 81, I actually came to the conclusion that I was really interested in getting heavily involved in the business and running of businesses and understanding the commercials, line management, if you like. So I was actually more interested in that than pursuing, if you like, the conventional sort of actuarial career. So first thing I did was did an MBA, did reasonably well with that. Where I was really fortunate was that I was working with MLC, which was then owned by Lendlease, and back then Lendlease was just an extraordinary dynamic organisation, and it really invested strongly in talent in organisations and especially young talent. So after completing the MBA, I had the gall, if you like, to just contact the managing director directly, John Morshall at the time, and he kindly agreed to see me. And I said, "This is what I've done, just completed the MBA. I'm actually interested in moving into line management," which some might say was the extreme of self-confidence or gall or whatever you want to call it. And to his great credit, and I'm eternally grateful to him, he said, "Yeah, sure, we'll explore opportunities." Cut a long story short, within 9 months, I was already installed into a pretty senior line management role at the time. And that was a reflection of Lendlease and their belief in young people. They did it really well. They actually teamed me up with a really senior person who'd had 3.5 decades of street smart experience, and he was working alongside me. So I got really good mentoring support on making that transition. So it was a great experience. And you reflect on these things years later, and so some key takeouts were, first of all, have the preparedness to step out of comfort zones, and that was definitely stepping out of comfort zone for me, but it was a positive experience. Secondly, what I learned from Lendlease was always be prepared to invest strongly in talent, and especially young talent, and give them an opportunity at an early stage.
Yeah.
And I also learned the power of mentoring. I had a great early mentoring experience, and that's something which has sort of influenced my thinking throughout the years. So that was the early stage. I had a range of general management roles with MLC, and then in the early 90s, I transitioned to AMP. And again, a great experience. I was running marketing strategy and product at AMP. Philip Twyman, another eminent actuary, was the then head of Australian operations. He was a great guy to work with, and his belief was empowering people to do their role. So he did that with all the exec team. He did it with me running marketing and strategy and product. It means we could get lots of things done in a short space of time with a pretty strong management team. So the big lesson out of that experience was the power of empowerment. And so good early lessons from some of those roles.
Sure. So fascinating, Andrew, and I'm delighted to hear you highlighting some of those key kind of takeouts. But the one I think would strike the audience is, I'll call it courage and confidence rather than gall, to approach the MD, looking for a line management role. So yeah, quite something John Morshall listened and was able to find a spot for you.
Yeah, no, it was a great experience.
So with all this focus on your career path, how did you get involved formally with the Actuaries Institute for the first time?
Yeah, well, having been involved in a lot of those sort of line management roles, I hadn't been deeply engaged with the
Of course.
actuarial profession for a fair period of time. But I did get approached by the presidential trio back in the day in 1996, and John Trowbridge and Trevor Matthews in particular. And they had determined that we need to do a lot of work with the actuarial profession in terms of, if you like, marketing, brand actuary, the role of actuaries, the broader contribution that the profession could make, etc. They probably chose about the only committee I was probably qualified to head up at that stage, which was I had a fair bit of marketing experience by that stage with the AMP role. And they asked me to form a marketing committee. We had a great team of people, and we addressed issues like thinking about what are the strategic opportunities for actuaries in the future, bearing in mind that some of the traditional roles, like in defined benefit schemes, some of those roles were starting to diminish, and we needed to think about the future of the profession. We needed to think about marketing actuaries, for want of a better term, the involvement of actuaries with key stakeholders like regulators, government, public policy. So there's a whole range of things that we did. We did a marketing audit and the like.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the strategic options we looked at were, so what are the different scenarios which we could conceive of for the actuarial profession? And there was four scenarios. One of those was, at one extreme, was what was called retreat to the core, which was to say, let's look at just the conventional defined actuarial roles in life insurance, in general insurance, in super, and let's just focus on the core. At the other end of the extreme, and by the way, that first one probably implied maybe needing to limit supply of actuaries.
Yes.
At the other extreme was thinking through, well, let's have the confidence in the profession and that people will find the opportunities which may exist, and some may not even exist at the moment, but that the profession can move out into those. So that was labelled self-confident permeation. We didn't claim credit for the title. It was actually borrowed from the English Institute. And that was basically saying, let's qualify all the people who meet the required standards as actuaries, don't place any limitations on supply, and will rely on the profession and individuals to find opportunities and new frontiers and the like as they emerge. And that was labelled self-confident permeation. So that was the approach adopted, and it's pretty much stood the test of time now over the last couple of decades, 3 decades. And I think that continues to apply to this day. If you look at the number of actuaries who are being educated through the universities and the like, and exploring opportunities, that whole issue of self-confident permeation applies even more so.
Yeah, quite extraordinary, and I'll resist the temptation to talk about the numbers and the areas that self-confident permeation has led to. We'll come back to the importance of strategy and dare say the marketing of that's related to that strategy in a little while. So this, in terms of your role, so you've had your first experience dealing with the presidential trio, with the Actuaries Institute in your marketing committee. So how did that lead to you becoming president?
So I was doing a lot of work with the Institute at the time on strategic planning. So we started off with strategic marketing. That sort of morphed into broader strategic planning. So I had a fairly significant role in that, along with many others, of course. I had a brief stint on council, I think it was 97 or 98, just filling a temporary vacancy. Enjoyed the experience and thought, I was really enjoying getting involved in all those issues. So I ran for council and got onto council in 2001. And so served on that. And because I had a great belief in the profession and the opportunities we could see and the like, that motivated me to say, yeah, I'd really like to make as valuable a contribution as I could.
Sure.
And the obvious way of doing that was getting involved in the leadership through the presidential trio and then ultimately president in 2005.
Okay.
So that's how I sort of morphed into that role.
No, that's okay. That all makes sense. So already you've had a lot of senior leadership roles. I'm really interested in how you saw the key leadership skills as president relative to some of the leadership skills that you had learned and applied, in the corporate world.
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously similarities. So, like if you're president, so it's more or less equivalent to chairing a board. So there's many equivalent things around your involvement in governance and strategic planning and risk, but there's different dimensions for a professional organisation. I think the overriding one always is purpose.
Yeah.
So I think professional organisations are one of the examples of where purpose, the whole concept of purpose, is absolute front and centre.
Yeah.
So in our case, serving the public interest. Of course, there's all the commercial opportunities for actuaries and the membership and membership development. But at our core, it's serving the public interest. And that shines through in our public policy work, in engagement with the government and the regulators. I think it's what the profession's always been highly regarded for, is that we always come from the perspective of objectivity, non-partisan, serving the public interest. So that shines through much more strongly, I think, than in a lot of the corporate type roles that one has.
Yeah.
The other dimension, of course, is the membership aspect. So not just professional standards, but all the member engagement. Thinking about how you create opportunities for them. A lot of focus on developing new frontiers. So one of the areas we were focusing on back then was on opportunities in banking. And I still think that that's a real opportunity for the profession, which we need to pursue even more vigorously. So I think it's the emphasis on government involvement, public policy, the member dimension, serving the public interest. They're sort of different dimensions that you get than in a range of corporate roles.
That's a good summary of the different dimensions, as you call it, of that profession rather than a corporate. So, Andrew, you had observed a number of presidents closely from 1996 to the time that you took over in 2005. What was, if anything, was different or unexpected when you were the president?
So there were some things which we laid the groundwork for, which I'll perhaps touch on in a moment, which were as planned. But of course, there's always unplanned developments. And in my case, back in 2005, and not just me, the council and the leadership, it was a lot of the issues which flowed from the HIH collapse. Which was back then around 2000, Australia's largest corporate collapse. And we had the Royal Commission and all the flow-on issues. So one of the first significant issues to flow from that for the actuarial profession was to reflect in legislation and statute the role of the appointed actuary in general insurance. Great development. We'd had the concept of the appointed actuary in life insurance for a long time preceding that, but it hadn't existed as a statutory type role in general insurance. So that was one of the first developments coming out of the HIH saga. The next one, which was the unexpected bit then, was to say, well, what's the next logical development in terms of governance and actuarial contribution for general insurance? And the next logical development was financial condition reports.
Yes.
Now, I've always regarded financial condition reports as being an invaluable source of insight into the health of business and issues to address, etc. So initially I thought, that financial condition reports have been in existence in the life insurance field for, I think, at least 15, 20 years maybe, but not in general insurance. So I had anticipated that would be a fairly straightforward and next and logical development. So that wasn't quite the case, in that there was actually proved to be quite a contentious development in the profession at the time, because a range of actuaries, and especially in the general insurance field, were very supportive of that. But equally, there were strong views about whether it involved overreach. So people were concerned of, if we get involved with FCRs, will we be asked to opine on issues which we're not necessarily expert in, especially if it's opining on various broader risk dimensions rather than just the traditional actuarial ones? What will be the reaction of senior executives in general insurance companies? Are the actuaries sort of trying to be involved in an overreach, etc.? So there were concerns, and legitimate concerns, about how we navigated that. So we did end up navigating those issues, but the process involved really significant engagement with the profession, lots of discussion, lots of communication, and very much needing to, not just me, the council and the leadership, take the membership on the journey for that next logical development. So that ended up dominating a fair portion of the year, which I hadn't anticipated. The FCRs did progress. It's clearly been a really positive development. I think history would show that. But that was the unexpected portion of the year.
So, Andrew, modesty aside, as president, what do you think the key success factor in understanding and then overcoming some of that resistance?
Well, I think the first key aspect is not to dismiss those concerns, but really to listen and understand them, because they were legitimate views being expressed. It was also consulting other stakeholders, so the views of regulators, senior execs in the industry, and taking into account all those issues and trying to make the case and provide persuasive arguments as to the benefits of this, and if there were concerns, how you can put some risk management around those concerns and guide it through. So it was understanding, listening, stakeholder engagement, and lots of communication.
Sure. No, powerful example. Thank you. So, Andrew, one of the other key themes of your role as president was really promoting the profession's role in contributing to society. So I'm just interested in how that played out and some of the subsequent activities for the profession.
Yeah, so I've always been a really strong believer in actuaries having, if they want to pursue it, a broader, if you like, social contribution to make. And many actuaries do. So in many respects, I think we're in a fortunate and somewhat privileged position of having the particular skills and capabilities that we have. Certainly we can deploy those to whatever career role that we have, but I think there's the opportunity to make an even broader contribution. So many people do that with the Institute in their volunteering roles. It's fabulous, the degree of volunteering in the actuarial profession. But then you think about lots of societal issues, and can actuaries make a valuable contribution there? So you think about big public policy issues. So whether it's with retirement income policy, financing the ageing, aged care, health systems, intergenerational issues, there's this whole broad suite of issues where actuaries could make a valuable contribution. There's a couple of ways of doing that. One of the things I referenced in the presidential report was, if you like, the social equity role of institutions. So much of the social equity contribution actuaries can make is by helping the institutions they serve, general insurance companies, super funds, health organisations, fulfil their social equity role with even greater distinction by bringing some of that actuarial capability. So that was a key area of focus. And then I thought, for actuaries to feel comfortable doing that, there's probably it's not so much a leadership development, it's more a personal development journey to go on. Excuse me. So part of that is, first of all, having what I call width of lens. So rather than seeing the world as in a fairly fixed state, is taking a wide view and say, yes, I can have some influence or contribution to a better society. So that's width of lens. It's having as much emphasis, I think, on EQ versus IQ.
Yeah.
I'm just going to take a pause from take a sip, excuse me.
You may.
So actuaries, by definition, pretty bright, strong IQ, but a lot of career development and also a lot of the contribution you can make is much even more dependent, I think, on EQ than IQ once you pass a certain stage. So I thought, well, maybe there needs to be some skill development in that space in due course. So cut a long story short, all of that led, subsequent to my year as president, to the formation of the leadership committee. I was asked by the then council to pick up some of those threads and carry that forward, and we formed what was called the leadership committee, but was more really a focus on service rather than leadership.
Yeah.
And if you get involved in service type contributions and serving with distinction in many of those areas, then inevitably, as you do that and do that well, then leadership opportunities will beckon. And how do we equip people to be prepared to take on those opportunities as they arise? So that was the genesis of the leadership committee, set up in 2007. It had three broad streams. We had a lot of fun. So one stream was a boot camp. So we had a 3-day boot camp for those who were involved in it. And a lot of that was focused around all the dimensions of EQ. So things like self-awareness, awareness of others, influencing skills, that if you call them soft skills, but they're actually incredibly important.
Yes, of course.
Getting back to the comment before about mentoring, we had a very strong mentoring component to it, and a process for matching up mentors and mentees. And it's great to see that some of that theme continues in the Institute today. And the other big component was people actually getting involved in working on a project where they could make a difference. Or MAD, I call it MAD, make a difference. And preferably working with people from other disciplines, not just the actuarial discipline. So people needed to identify and work on a project where they could work with others to make a difference, probably of 12 to 18 month duration. And roughly 75% of those ended up being people working on social impact type initiatives. And I think for those who went through the few cohorts who went through that process, that was a really valuable experience.
Yeah. So, I mean, some wonderful legacy from that. You've already talked about the ongoing commitment to mentoring in the profession, but in particular, this sense of contributing to society, both on individual level, and we've seen the hackathon continuing, but also at a profession level as well. So, when you're talking about your initial role with the Institute, this fundamental aspect about clarifying the strategy for the profession in Australia, I said we come back to strategy, and I'm really interested in the vision thing. So, I guess your thoughts on the importance of vision, how it links to strategy, and how it ultimately gets communicated.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. And I think there's actually, when I think about that, I think there's actually a range of pillars which are essential for an organisation's or a profession's success and sustainability. And vision is one of those, but there's a few pillars. The first one I go to is actually purpose, which is a bit different. And purpose is the why of any organisation. Why do we exist? So one of the things I've learned in particular from the not-for-profit sector, where I've had some involvement, is the power of purpose. It's very evident in other areas. Super funds is another obvious example, professional associations. So the first one I focus on is purpose. So it's the why, it's what provides inspiration. The second pillar, I think, is vision, which is articulating that purpose but it's providing direction, trying to paint a vivid description of where we're going.
Yep.
The other one, which I think is key, are values. Real focus on value sets and the things that we hold dear. And then you move into mission and all those other components. The other one I found really powerful in a range of capacities is articulating beliefs. So, as an example, I was on the board of the Self-Managed Super Fund Association for 6 or 7 years, chair for a couple of years. We reached the view that it would be really useful and powerful if, in the work that we did, we actually articulated our beliefs. We called it a belief statement and made it very clear, SMSF Association, this is what we're doing, why we exist, what we're seeking to contribute, etc. I've also done that recently with a not-for-profit that I chair. The power of that with the belief statements is whenever you're doing a presentation, if you're engaging with stakeholders, you're dealing with government, you're making submissions, you can state right up front, here's our set of beliefs. This is where we're coming from. So, yes, vision's really important, back to your original question, but I think it's actually that combination of real clarity on purpose, vision, mission, values, belief statements, that suite of pillars, if you like, that to me is really powerful. And things such as the purpose and the values and belief statements, I think also mean you start getting emotional connection. When you talk through those things with people, you really start getting emotional engagement, and that becomes more compelling.
Okay. That's a really effective way of setting out and describing those key pillars. Thank you, Andrew. Just a couple of questions before we wrap up. So the first, you've clearly given a lot of thought to this broad topic of leadership in so many different areas. Have you got an overriding type of leadership philosophy?
We'll be right back.
Julia Lessing's new book, Senior Leadership, An Essential Guide for Actuaries, covers advanced managerial strategies designed for more experienced leaders. It builds on the foundation of Julia's first book, Aspiring Actuarial Leaders. Together, these two books offer actuaries a complete leadership development pathway. The strength of this new guide lies in its practical strategies that actuarial leaders can implement to improve teamwork and organizational effectiveness. We're thrilled to collaborate with Julia again. She's an inspiration to actuaries everywhere.
Yes, I do, and I probably touched on some of these on the way through. But the first one is being absolutely crystal clear on purpose, vision, and values. I mean, to me, each of those are, if you like, the foundation. I'll sort of go back to, there was a book called Built to Last by Collins and Porras, and it talked about lessons from the most successful organisations, mainly American ones, over the last century. And they sort of talk about the yin and the yang, and that is that purpose and values are almost immutable. They're the foundation. They don't change over time. So they're the bedrock. Things like how you translate those into what you do, especially through strategies, that actually needs to be highly dynamic, can change all the time, it needs to be flexible, etc. So you've got the yin and the yang. So part of my philosophy is trying to encapsulate that in anything that you do. As you would have heard, I've got a really strong belief in this concept of servant leadership. Servant leadership was originally articulated by a gentleman called Robert Greenleaf back around the 1970s. It's stood the test of time. And that philosophy basically says, adopt a philosophy of serving. So whether it's serving a cause, serving a purpose, whether it's an organisation, whether it's an NFPs, and focus on the servant contribution first. And inevitably, if you do that, and if you do that with distinction, then inevitably leadership opportunities will arise.
Yeah.
And that's different to saying, in a career sense, I want to go for this hierarchical role. In a leadership sense, it's actually focused first on service. The leadership opportunities will evolve.
Okay.
I think the power of whether you call it a North Star or a light in the hill, I do come back to purpose and values, having absolute clarity on that. And then as you work through that, obviously when you're dealing with stakeholders, so whether it's members or regulators or clients, distribution channels, using all of that to get people fully aligned so that you can better fulfill whatever the objectives are that you're pursuing. So stakeholder engagement and fulfillment. So there'd be other aspects, but they'd be some of them.
No, very, very thought-provoking summary. Thank you. So 2 questions to go. One, given especially the way you started thinking about the future of the profession in Australia, 2026, what are your thoughts on the outlook for the profession?
Yes, well, if we thought it was challenging back in 1996, even more so now. But I still absolutely share the view of self-confident permeation. So we're qualifying people through actuarial undergraduate courses at a great rate these days. I think that's marvellous that people come through with that sort of training. We had Bernard Wong come along to a past presidents gathering just a few weeks ago and talking about the success they're having at New South Wales Uni. Their latest intake was around about 550 students.
Wow.
Which blew me out of the water. Wow, it was way more than I expected. And about 90% of those are domestic-based students.
Mm-hmm.
So bearing in mind, I've lost track, but we've got something like 6 to 8 universities qualifying actuaries these days. So there's a very strong supply coming through. Now, of course, not all those people will go on to conventional fully qualified roles. That doesn't matter. I think having that grounding is great. So that makes the whole concept of self-confident permeation even more important. So where do the opportunities exist? And this is where I think you come back to the concept of having width of lens or a broad mindset to really conceive of what could the opportunities be. Yeah. And at a very high level, it's just saying, so what's the skill base that we have? And it's helping people understand uncertainty, especially financial uncertainty, and combining that with a lens around the commercial dimensions and the risk management dimensions. That's the broad skill set. And if you say that's the broad skill set, well, in which domains could that be applied?
Yeah.
Well, it's huge.
Yeah.
A lot of focus at the moment, of course, on data and analytics. So that's a well understood opportunity. But even for actuaries involved in that space, I think the extra dimension we bring to that is combining the data insights bit with the commercial overlay bit and understanding the financials. And when you bring those two together, so I think that's sort of a bit of our value add. I think there's a really burning issue where actuaries could get involved these days is around what I call the longevity economy.
Yeah.
I call it, lots of others call it the longevity economy, and all the associated intergenerational issues. So if you actually think about longevity not as being a problem in a fiscal sense, but as a great opportunity, and there's fabulous work being done by Stanford Uni and others around the real implications of longevity developments. People can reconceive career paths, extended working lives, etc. So all the dimensions which apply to the longevity economy and intergenerational issues is clearly an area where actuaries can make a great contribution.
Sure.
I still think there's great opportunities in the banking sector.
You mentioned that.
I think one of the challenges for banks in the last couple of decades is history has probably shown that they haven't understood fat tails as well as they might. And if you think about people, especially in the general insurance space, great expertise in understanding fat tails. So I know we've got a reasonable number of our members involved in the banking sector, but I think in a whole range of areas in banking, so whether it's capital management, pricing, risk, I think that's fertile territory for us to make a greater contribution.
Okay.
And I'd love to see actuaries, and there are lots doing this already, really getting involved in the not-for-profit sector.
Yeah.
We've got some, there's major needs out there, major contributions, a whole range of heroes, I think, in the profession already involved in that space. Not going to name a whole bunch of them, but so I know a lot of actuaries are doing that. But given the size of the NFP sector and economy and their purpose-driven organisations, I think great contribution there for actuaries. So
Sure. Okay.
they'd just be a few examples.
Well, I appreciate the breadth of your optimism. Andrew, the very last question we ask all of our guests on We Are Actuaries is, what's your one top tip for actuaries who are aspiring to leadership roles?
Oh, I'm limited to one top tip, am I? I'm a great believer in the concept of what I call growth through stretch. So in a personal development sense, the best opportunities arise when you get involved in new opportunities, which initially you feel are way outside your comfort zone. And it's having the courage or the confidence or whatever to pursue those opportunities. Even better if you do that with some mentoring support. And so what the Institute's doing at the moment with mentoring support, I think, is great. And you can apply that in a whole range of areas, but we've got some big wicked challenges to be served out there in the community, and applying some of that mindset. So whether it's in your conventional actuarial roles and your career, I think it's growth through stretch and stepping outside your comfort zones.
Thank you, Andrew. What a wonderful concept to wrap up on, growth through stretch. It's been a pleasure chatting with you today. Thank you very much again for your wisdom and your very powerful summaries and thoughts today.
Thanks, Martin. Really enjoyed it. Ta.
So there you have it, real life stories and practical tips from a leader using their actuarial superpowers to make a difference in the world. If you enjoyed this episode, feel free to get in touch, subscribe, leave us a review and share it with your network. You'll find details from today's interview in the show notes below and on our website www.guardianactuarial.com.au. Until next time.
It's exciting to see Julia releasing 2 books in 2025. Her latest title, Senior Leadership, An Essential Guide for Actuaries, is designed for seasoned leaders who are further along in their careers. It builds on the foundation of her first book, Aspiring Actuarial Leaders, The Modern Manager's Toolkit, which supports new and emerging managers. Together, these 2 books now offer actuaries a complete leadership development pathway. As with Julia's first book, the strength of this new guide lies in its practical strategies, tools actuaries can apply to their work right away. It helps leaders feel more confident, grounded, and better prepared for the challenges they face. What sets Julia's approach and this book apart is how they weave together stories and experiences from a wide range of actuarial professionals. Senior Leadership, An Essential Guide for Actuaries, equips leaders with tools to foster workplaces where teams can perform at their highest potential. We're thrilled to collaborate with Julia again. She's not only a joy to work with, but also an inspiration to actuaries everywhere.